Well, good morning, everybody. Very warm welcome. It's not too cold in our Pilgrims Hall, which is good, but coats advised, well done if you knew that ahead of time. A very warm welcome to the first Pilgrims Parley of this academic year. The intellectual equivalent, perhaps, of an early morning jog, invigorating, faintly challenging, and with the potential to leave at least a few of us questioning our life choices. For the uninitiated, Pilgrims Parleys are our series of panel discussions featuring senior leaders from many of the South's top independent schools, sort of educational Avengers, but with more data points and fewer capes. Together they tackle some of the big questions around educating boys. And today we plunge straight into the philosophical deep end with a fundamental question: what does a successful boy look like in today's schools? And are we measuring the right things? Because in 2025, success can mean anything from top grades to emotional resilience to remembering to bring both shoes into school. Truly, it is a broad church. It's a question that goes right to the heart of what we do as educators and parents. That delicate dance between results, well-being, balance, character, and the occasional reminder that no, you can't revise for your ISCB pre-test using Minecraft. On the one hand, society loves a spreadsheet. On the other, we're increasingly aware that producing well-rounded, grounded young men is not something you can capture on a pie chart. So today we'll explore how these ideas coexist, collide, and occasionally hide from each other behind the bike sheds, and how schools can best prepare boys not only to achieve, but to flourish. Which brings me neatly and with rehearsed elegance to our four distinguished panellists. In alphabetical order by surname, just to ensure full neutrality. Anna Camilleri is currently head of English at Eton College, where she has taught since 2018. Prior to this, she held a career development fellowship at Christ Church, Oxford. She completed a doctorate on Byron's poetic treatment of heroism in 2012 and continues to publish on his life and work. To what extent Byron's example should be considered in the scope of today's question, we wait to see. Anna will be starting as Deputy Head Academic at Charterhouse in January. Rob Clare is father to two boys, aged 9 and 7, a church leader, and has been at Embley for 10 years, 7 of which were as head of mathematics and the last 3 as director of studies. After studying mathematics at Cardiff and doing his teacher training in Bristol, Rob started his career at a state school and before spending 2 years in El Salvador teaching in a British international school, while supporting local charities and exploring Central America. Lucky chap. On returning to the UK, he taught at Leighton Park School in Reading, and as assistant housemaster, mathematics and theory of knowledge teacher, before joining Embley. James Fox has just finished 12 years of service as a housemaster at Winchester College, the latter 4 years of which he was senior housemaster. James teaches biology and from January will take up the position of Director of Pastoral Care at the college. Prior to housemastership, James served as Director of Rowing at both Winchester and Abingdon, with medals at Henley, National Schools and Junior Worlds amongst his pupils' achievements. In his spare time, he cycles with VC Venter, plays golf and enjoys coastal walks in Pembrokeshire with his wife Elizabeth and their 2 children. After growing up on the west coast of Australia, Adam Williams moved to the UK over 30 years ago, attending Bradfield College and then reading geography at Durham, before starting a career in sales and marketing. Quickly realising that education was his true vocation, he moved into the educational sector, teaching geography and coaching sport at Bradfield College before becoming head of department. He then moved to Oakham School's geography department, coaching several cricket and golf teams to national success. 9 years as a housemaster followed, before 3 years as deputy rector at the Glasgow Academy. In 2015 came the opportunity to take on the headship at Lord Wandsworth College. At his happiest on a windswept links course with a 2-iron in his hand or climbing mountains with his family, Adam has a passion for pupil voice, character education and in ensuring leadership for all. Please would you join me in just giving our panellists a warm welcome. So thank you so much for all being here, and I know we're all hugely looking forward to some good, thorough discussion. 2 parts to our first question, if I may. First of all, because we mustn't assume, do we think traditional notions of success in boys' education have changed, and if so, how? And what do we think should be the direction of evolution here? Do we want any takers to start with?
I could go.
Go on, Mr. Fox.
I would start off by saying within schools, I do get the very strong impression that those notions of success, I wouldn't say necessarily they've changed, but there is a very broad scope of recognition in terms of what it looks like. Obviously, the academic side has been important for a long time, but recognising that a lot of self-esteem and self-worth can come from all corners of a school and your education, being on the playing fields and the drama, theatre, etc., has been long recognised in schools. From my perspective as a housemaster, I think there's a slight tension between that and what universities continue to look for. Treading that balance and making sure that pupils are obviously prepared well academically, but at the same time are happy along that journey is something definitely in which there is a tension.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I don't think the fundamentals have necessarily changed, but the emphasis has shifted. I think that's partly because today's children are facing so much more in terms of the pressures around them. Post 2008, it's clear why anxiety started to hit students so hard. I think you're absolutely right. Universities expect an awful lot from the kids that come their way. I don't think universities, I think they're getting better at looking at pastoral care and ensuring the happiness of their students. But when it comes to admission of them, they're mostly interested in how well they've done across the board academically. And it's our responsibility to make sure that our pupils are as well prepared as possible academically while also having that character education. And I think the recognition that schools have come to is that character education doesn't happen by accident. You actually have to take a lead on that and have really clear educational policies, and you have to have really good training to make sure that we're supporting them in the best way we can.
Yeah, I would say, I was just thinking about my two boys, and I would say that when I think about success for them, it's them getting what they want, or what I want for them. And sometimes I think, well, what do I want for them? I want them to be passionate about things and then achieve those things. I want them to be able to hold their own in a conversation and feel comfortable within themselves. And actually, at no point do I think necessarily, and exam results is necessarily part of that, but that is the way that maybe they get the opportunity to do those things. And so, I think that schools now have a responsibility when churches and local institutions have kind of gone away, and as you say, the pressures of the modern time, to hold that position where it's not just about those things, but help formation with those things as well.
Just if I may, I agree with all of that entirely. Success for most of us blokes is, I think, probably not pulling you back when you're doing your shoelaces at a certain age. But I've got a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old. They're just brilliant. So classic moment, just before half term, one of the nurses phones me up. This is why boys are so stunning. So he's gone into the health centre. He's got a little he's got sort of those mouth ulcers. Oh, nurse, please can you help me out? So she's helped him with giving him some stuff. He's gone home and he's told his mum. He says, nurse was so amazing. She sorted me out. It doesn't hurt anymore. He said, well, what did she give you? And he went, Bollinger. I mean, absolutely, that's what success looks like. Because they're all, I've not made a single piece of that up. It is world class. But I think there's a piece around, boys' success and what does that look like? I mean, I think it's different for everyone and every parent and every family. I think society has a slightly different view now, unfairly, on what boys' success looks like. I think all we can do, all of us in education, I think as families too, got to get round them, be there for them, keep the fridge full, just let them know you love them, whether you say it properly or not, and they will fly, ultimately. They will absolutely fly. And society will judge, universities want some data to get in and the likes, but actually giving them that real sense of inner self-worth and self-confidence, because even when they're 6'5", they're very fragile, and they just want to be told you believe in them, you've got them, and you're not an ingredients house. For those of you who've got boys, have you ever been told that yet? When they look in the fridge, on the cupboards, and they say this is such an ingredients house, i.e. there's no rubbish snacks in there. So keep going with the ingredients house.
Do we think that societal change and social media have impacted the way our boys might define their success? Is this something that we have to try and work with, and in which way do we have to try and work with that?
There's some really alarming statistics surrounding boys' self-image. And the assumption, I think, for many years has been that girls are the ones who are most impacted by social media and self-image. And it's very, very clear that it's very much not the case, that boys are the ones who are really struggling there. And I have quite dim views on the effects of, or the impact on social media on our children's well-being. But the fact is they use it. And I think giving them a sense of perspective, criticism, the independence of thought, to be able to recognise that what they're being fed, because they are being fed this stuff through these evil algorithms, it is not a diet that they need to consume. They can refuse it. So no, I think there are so many more pressures now, and I'm not a parent. I really feel for parents. I don't know that there is an answer as to how you get it right. But certainly I think the recognition of the fragility of boys, you were gesturing towards this earlier, I think we've really underestimated the emotional fragility of boys. We focus a lot on girls over the years. Maybe we've got that emphasis slightly wrong.
I was just going to say that I think that what I see at Embley, so we have an extensive co-curricular, one of which is the CCF. And when boys are busy and they're doing things that keep their minds on it, that, that urgency, and they get completely encapsulated by what they're doing, then those things go away. And they start to actually get in a cycle of seeing that when they do something well, when they've put effort in and they've achieved something, then actually that gives them that buzz, that dopamine buzz that they would have got from whatever feed, or and that community that they've been looking at for that belonging. And so it's actually been purposeful in putting them into situations that are challenging, that do stretch them beyond who they think they are, but also where they can have success. And that allows them to start telling themselves a different story about themselves, and replace what is very powerful that's coming from social media and alike.
I was just going to pick up on Anna's point about social media, which is that a lot of these, we call them influencers, I suppose, what they're very good at doing is picking up on disenfranchisement and discontent. And then what they do is they fill sort of the remedies with highly objectionable sort of solutions and notions of what success looks like, money, etc., power, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I think is fantastic about the school environment is that it can fill those gaps. And as you were saying, Rob, put in things that give pupils a real sense of self-worth. And talking on the subject of competence, I completely agree. And it's not about being the best at something. It's about feeling like you can make progress at something, and having that progress recognised. And that, as a schoolmaster, is the essence, really, of what I've been trying to do, to make pupils understand, yes, hard work does pay off, but actually any progress along the way is worth celebrating.
So just to rewind a couple of minutes, are we sensing that, this feeling of disenfranchisement or lack of success essentially comes down to not finding your flourishing, but at the same time, we're sort of acknowledging that universities seem to be actually narrowing their field of vision and looking at grades increasingly. You only have to look at certain ways that universities position themselves on social media to try and get understanding of their processes and their entrance processes out there. That, again, it does seem to be very academically focused. That loss, there feels to be a slight sense of loss of the breadth that, as independent schools, we typically celebrate. Is this proving a really difficult tension to manage? Because if our boys want to find their flourishing in non-academic spaces, and yet we're trying to encourage them to get to the best universities, because that's great for our Russell Group stats and our US university stats and so on, where do we find this tension sitting at the moment?
I mean, always, it's just like all of us as grown-ups, you want to try and find your vibe in your tribe, realistically. And I think that one of the things I've noticed over the years now of seeing children go into university, more so in the last 5, 10, is that they're a bit bored. We spin them so hard at our schools, and you do as families too, you do so much with them. And I wouldn't want to be misquoted on that. I've seen it with my own children too. They're so used to sort of moving from thing to thing to thing, and I'll try that, and I'll have adventure here, and I'll go and do this, and I'll do that. And then they get to university, and they're pretty independent folk. They are when they leave our schools, but it's not quite set up in that way. And they have to work really hard. I see it on gap years as well sometimes, if children don't have proper gap years set out and organised before. So I think in helping them, supporting them, and for you as parents, because this is a proper team effort, this is not drop off and pick up and how are they, giving them a way to, when they can feel a bit of boredom coming, when it's all looking a bit quiet in the diary, how do they find those moments? How do they fill that time? And P.S. it just could be reading and finding an incredible book and just letting their brain go in that space. Or it could be a bit of music. But I think that's a cool challenge for us, because all of us schools here, we teach the children really well. They all get some really cool results for who they are, but it's those other bits beyond there, really, I think.
I mean, I could alter the first word of the next question to should, but let's stick with is at the moment. Is success now more about the kind of person a boy becomes than what he achieves? Or not, because we're looking at these university targets that need to be met?
I think if achievement is being recognised in the right ways, then that's celebrating what the boy has become. So I think in terms of academics, the exam result at the end should ideally reflect not just that one day that they've sat the exam, but the person they've become in that subject. Should we do more of that? Should we as schools be celebrating more diverse ranges of success? I think we are. I think we do. And I think if you look at the level, the amount of possibilities and opportunities boys have in our schools to succeed and to show the success, and we're not talking about just being in the first football team, or we're talking about that all of the co-curricular and super-curricular opportunities. So I think we should, and I also think we do. I think we're getting that right in a way that perhaps we hadn't before.
Would it be fair to say we all sort of have our sort of social media teams and our marketing teams who will track sort of what levels that you are sort of pushing out, sort of celebrating success. So it's not just all about certain areas. We do.
Adam, you've developed a very explicit character education programme at Lord Wandsworth.
Yeah.
How do you try and kind of measure the students' success in that framework alongside their academics?
Yeah, gosh, it's pretty tricky actually. But I mean, obviously kite marks and the likes, that you bring in external organisations to have a look at you. I think what we've done, I'm really honest, is I'm a pretty bad golfer, but it's getting worse. But you don't worry about the score at the end of the round. It's all about the process that goes along the way, and you just get into every shot and you hit that shot. I think what I think schools do well, I don't think we all articulate it yet. If you go to the end, children born in 2009 are going to live to 100 in the UK, if you believe the stats. That's the vibe. So what are we doing to ensure that children live long, contented, meaningful lives? I don't like the word happy. I think that's a bit superficial. What are we doing out there? Who's doing that out there? When you look at the blue zones of the world, when you look at all the data that helps children, what is society doing here? Well, it's intergenerational living. It's a little bit of, it's a bit of mix of meat and veg. It's being kind. It's being optimistic. Optimists live 7 to 10 years longer when you look at the stats. Fascinating, isn't it? Read Kevin Roberts' book, 64 Shots, Art of Leadership in a Crazy World. He'll talk about radical optimism, which is a cool place to be. But if you look at that, if you look at the fitness and sport and health and adventure that we're providing for our children, the things that we do are predicated on giving children long, healthy lives. We should be doing yoga, we should be doing Pilates, we should be doing core strength stuff. When we go into a gym, they love the gyms these days, these teenagers going through. We've just built a brand new one at our place. There are no mirrors. Because why would you have, it's just, that ghastly posturing nonsense. None of that. So there are no mirrors in there. That's fantastic for the children. And then someone say, I need to work on my form. Well, you can get a friend to tell you that. But looking at all the things out here that will give them that real success in their lives, whatever that might look like, that's the magic. You then build that through character education programs, however we do that. You build that through academics, all of that. But that's what we should be focusing on here so that they can really make a difference.
I was just going to pick up on that point about the longevity point, which takes the counter sort of or the cloud of that silver lining is that we're all going to be working a lot longer as well. And one of the, I think, the obvious but key aspects of what we're trying to do in schools is to engender a lifelong love of learning. And I think we all recognise that arriving in the workplace now is not the end. There's a lot of personal and professional development that gets done now. Listening to doctors on the radio yesterday talking about all the training they have to do once in their roles. So, there's that aspect of it, but I think your point about the things like enjoying reading and just the simple process of learning things for the sake of it. That's what we want to really develop, and I think that is the thing. I'm going to use the word happy. That's the thing I think is going to make them happy long term in their lives.
Bringing it back into schools, because the workplace is incredibly important. We'll come to that in a short while, but do we feel that what we're doing in schools in terms of current assessments and reporting systems and things like this, are these fit for the purpose? Are we saying that there's a dual purpose? There's the purpose that we recognise at a more broader level. There's the purpose of making sure that they get into the best higher education that their potential fits them to. So what do we feel about our assessment and reporting systems currently? Are these fit for purpose?
As the non-academic on the, well, shall I go first on this one? That I think there is a tension in reporting which is generated by what universities are looking for, grades. And I think as parents, you will feel this, you'll know exams are coming at certain points, in year 12 and et cetera, or year 11, year 13. And you want to know where your children are in relation to those outcomes. I think the problem with that is that we know when we try and learn things, our progress isn't linear. It's incremental. So the danger of some reporting systems that I think have been the norm for a long time is that they simply show a child what he has achieved at the end of an assessment, and they don't necessarily point out what it is, where the gaps are, what he or she needs to do, and that is there's a real danger there that a lot of hard work and time and investment doesn't get reflected in the reporting system. I think schools are picking up on this and obviously prioritising effort, etc., over achievement. But as Adam points out, it's a team game, this, and I think for it to have a positive effect on the child, as parents, as schools, we all have to recognise that if we prioritise summative outcomes, there's a real danger that we're missing what's going on and how much progress the child is making. We may not see it yet, but it's it might be there.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think the best way to think about how a student is developing, it's very hard to measure character within a grade system. And I wouldn't go down that route. It's about conversations. And it's about conversations that happen with the child while they're doing the academics. What have you learned from this? What could we do better next? Something we do at Embley is we have a thinking curriculum. So we have different ways of approaching problems. So it might be nested questions. Or you've got this big question. What's the smaller questions you can ask to make it more manageable? Or, what if? What if you did this route? What if you did that route? And having these conversations and being purposeful and allowing teachers to have time to do that actually enables them, that feeds back into their academics. Because now they're not overwhelmed and they have a plan and they own that plan going forward. And then reporting back to parents, it's about those conversations as well. I've seen in the child this, that, and the other. And so it's not a case of on a grade card that you will see this, because that's not the best way to do it. It's about actually having that personal relationship with the child and that relationship with the parent that enables everyone to be on the same page, to celebrate what they're doing and how they're developing, and encourage them to do more. So.
Which speaks to the absolute paradox that some of the most valuable questions in education are precisely those that don't have a right or wrong answer. So how can you possibly measure the way in which they're actually quantifying that? We lay quite a lot of emphasis upon boys, particularly as they head towards senior school interviews and so forth, being able to manage the so-called philosophical style questions, and dealing with those grey zones of ambiguity in the professional world is increasingly important too. We know really that the best educated people are those that can walk that pathway of human tension between two opposing viewpoints and so forth, and the metrics support the quantification of our answers, but actually the ability to manage whether there is a right or wrong answer or not is a fundamental part of all of that. This is obviously something you're having to think about coming into your new role, I should imagine, Anna.
No, I am. I just wanted to go back a second to reporting and assessment, which I think with reporting it's really fascinating for me in that I think schools think we over-report. If you ask teachers, they'll say they spend too much time writing reports, and if you speak to parents, they'll say, well, we don't get anything. We don't ever hear what's going on. So I think as a school, it's really difficult to manage that tension between what you can ask your teachers to do and what your parents rightly expect. And I think if reporting is used really well, it's the most valuable opportunity to sit down as a teacher and think for 5 or 10 minutes about each of those students that you teach, and to give that qualitative feedback that's going to help parents understand the quantitative data. So why is it that this boy is not achieving as high marks in his Latin tests? Well, actually it's because he's really struggling with this aspect of the vocabulary, but he's been trying really hard. And back to the point about learning not being linear, all of that effort that's being put in will end up paying off. Now that's you've got the same data point for that boy as you have for a boy who's been underperforming and hasn't been doing his independent work and has been showing up late and forgetting his whatever you use, pencil, pen, Apple Pencil. So I think it's a really valuable point to start a dialogue with parents. And I wonder if we fully in a busy school year, reports always come at pinch points. And I think it's easy for teachers to resent those moments, and it's easy for parents to resent the teachers for not writing as much as they wanted them to, but we need to strike that balance. We need to give our teachers time, and I don't think the answer is to get those AI generated. So that's on that. And sorry, you had another point about you asked me something else that I.
No, just in terms of coming into your new role as deputy head academic and considering the systems that you might want to look at. I mean, you mentioned there's quite a lot of research in both senses of the word, that you're having to sort of look at in terms of how these really do serve the purpose that you want them to.
Well, I'm really interested in the GCSE question, because Winchester's obviously approached that differently to our schools, and given the recent kind of DFE report, it'd be really interesting to know what you're doing with GCSEs.
In terms of the numbers?
The numbers.
Well, I think there was a time when I started where I think there were a group of pupils who we didn't bother with GCSEs. They went straight into the A-level curriculum, and I think universities and their systems of application somewhat determined that we couldn't do that. The numbers of GCSEs that we do now, I think, is probably much more in line with what most schools do. It's, I think, obviously at Winchester we have this subject div, which is non-examined. We spend a lot of time doing it. I guess to kind of summarise the kind of philosophy behind that is that if you have something, or you have a way of educating children, they buy in, parents buy in, where there is no assessment at the end, it's purely there for the love of learning. If it works, it's a fantastic thing to have. So it was for that reason that we did fewer, but I think actually we're slowly, the numbers have been creeping up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll sit anywhere between 8 and 10. I mean, it totally depends on the child and getting it right for them and the space that they need. And in reality, it's a stepping stone through, really. It's getting that, obviously, the spacing around there too. Sort of training work on sustainability, oracy. We're doing some things in a minute around, do children understand things like venture capital, just all of that life experience stuff that sits within there. Some nice competition that sits in there too. Just a healthy balance, realistically, a healthy balance.
I think that's probably a point worth picking up on, which is that the British curriculum still encourages this sort of narrowing to 3 subjects, obviously at A-level. Co-curricular in schools has all sorts of meanings. One of which, much more common than it was when I was at school, is this academic co-curricular side. That because you're not taking a French at A-level doesn't mean you can't go and go to the French Society, etc. So encouraging them to keep breadth in those ways that are open to them at schools like this and the secondary schools they go to is hugely important.
Are we recognising, if we move on to, or return perhaps, to the world of work and employment and so forth, are we suggesting that there's potentially a bit of a problem around the top end A-level into university phase, and that then employers become more engaged with what we traditionally value as independent schools with that holistic approach? Employers seem to be increasingly honing their selection processes around some of those more undefinable skill sets rather than just the pure grades. I mean, one hears, and I have to not claim to have too strong a connection to this world, but of hundreds and hundreds of applicants to a particular role, almost all of whom will have the top grades. So you have to find another metric, and that other metric might involve their sort of holistic experience through school and university. It might involve, I know we've got some interest in sort of neurodiversity, and actually whether that's something which helps to cut through, because actually when interviewed you see that offers a very creative and different way of looking at things. Do we see a sort of A-level university issue and then employment starts to reconnect with what we're trying to achieve, or is that?
I think one of the problems we find, and I'm afraid boys in particular, tend to go towards very vocational subjects at degree level. And I think if we're thinking about how a career works, and we said we're going to be working longer than ever, we're also going to be changing career more than ever. And it's all well and good to go off and do your economics degree. Is that going to be the best degree for you if you want to be a CEO, if you want to be a manager of people? Should you be maybe thinking about more of a humanities route? So I'm really interested in that narrowing that Charterhouse offer IB and they offer A-level, and they find that girls are much more inclined to preserve that breadth and keep those doors open. Boys tend to become much more anxious about, well, where is this going to get me? And so tend to narrow earlier, and that can be a problem later on. So I think, we've done lots of great work with STEM. I think we need to think about, well, what kind of qualities do we need in our future leaders at work? And you look at people straight out of university the first 5 years, anyone that's done a STEM degree will earn more. But you look at those same stats 10 or 15 years later, those with humanities degrees are suddenly coming to the top because they're really good with people. So I wonder how AI will change our emphasis as well.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I think if you look at those skills, I think like we probably all do as schools, we run a bunch of networking events. Our parents, had 60 parents a couple of nights ago, were out, and actually it was under the strict instructions. You're not allowed to talk about your children. It was just, they really found that hard. But it was beautiful. We're trying to find ways to connect parents in and then us connect with them too about what is the world needing. The World Economic Forum will say being curious, creative, tech savvy, collaborative, emotionally intelligent. There's understanding big data, there's some critical thinking in there. So I suppose that's those spaces there. And it will continue, Anna, as you're saying, it's continuing to evolve and ebb. Getting their character traits right is the most important bit, I think, in all of this. Actually, and you're right about the boys sort of possibly trying to go certain areas, girls going in other areas. But I think if that's the space to give them that courage to, you've got 50, 60, 70, 100 people going for jobs, that's fine. You've got to have those little bits. Our parents were saying to us again yesterday, night before, we trust schools to deliver some really brilliant results. That's taken as given. They'll do well at university. Generally, that's taken as given. But I'm not interested in that. The same with the medical world. I don't know how many medics are in the room. It's not always those 4 A-starers there. My wife's a consultant locally. And, it's those who've got the soft skills, the EQ, the EI. That's the magic. That's where it is. And we must, I think, for all of us in challenging this pressure and that you hear, just got to results. Just take a little bit of pressure off that. Actually, they'll do the work for you because the culture will be there in all of our schools. Finding ways to just find little gaps and rabbit holes to explore, that's the magic.
Do we think that, coming back to how can we help our students get to that point of the employment assessment process in terms of capturing all of the good stuff that we do? Genuinely, I don't know this, but is there a scope towards sort of digital portfolios or ways in which that they can that can kind of coexist through university, but when they get to the point of going for job applications, they've got something to present quite aside from their grades that will help them to cut through that? I mean, how can we help our students to be able to ultimately demonstrate, to sift through the masses of applicants and so forth?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is, with the wide range of things that they're doing, is to create space for reflection and actually assess, what did I learn? What do I need to improve at? And as they're doing that, they are creating a narrative for their life that meta-naz, stepping back. How am I thinking about this? What am I doing about this? And this allows them to see, actually, I can give examples of when I've overcome this. And this builds it back into their own self-confidence, but it also builds back into be able to state as they go to employers and say, actually, I do have experience of this. And maybe there are children out there who, other individuals that go in and they they have had it, but they can't articulate it. And it's about being able to see the progress you're making, being able to then change the way that you're living so that you can take that next step as well. So I think it's about allowing that reflection time within our school time and teachers also feeding back, as I say, those conversations as well.
I think your point about them collating concrete examples is really important. Certainly the UCAS, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but UCAS have totally changed the personal statement. So candidates are having to draw on concrete examples, teachers are having to draw on concrete examples for their references. And as a teacher, I was given by a boy recently what we called a brag sheet. He was applying to Princeton. And my God, this reference should have been 800 words long. I couldn't cut it any shorter than 1,200 words because he'd just done so much stuff, but he'd recorded it meticulously. So for every quality and skill they were looking for, I could draw on 2 or 3 concrete examples of where he's done that. Now, whether you digitise that and you have a digital portfolio or you have an old-fashioned notebook, I don't think it matters, because I don't think you're going to go into a job interview and be able to put forward your digital portfolio. I'm not sure that'll go down terribly well, but to be able to draw on those examples is the thing.
Because most of the children are schools, and I'm sure it's the same at Pilgrims, when you get in the car with them, it's what you did today, not much. I mean, literally, they are knocking it out the park. And you see spot on, how do we collate that and help them? I love that, yeah, brag sheet, good, that's really cool.
I think, certainly speaking from my personal experience in the family, it's we as schools that have to take that lead, because as parents, you don't get that level of engagement. You try and engage them in in meta conversations around, what did you get out of your learning and did you reflect and so forth. It's like, oh God, Dad, you just always, and then your relationship becomes defined about being the parent that's always asking them to look to the future. And I think that there is a potential risk in that, because that, for my money, that classic childhood question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? Immediately they start to grasp, how do I define that and how do I get to that point? And then it becomes that linearity, which we're saying actually is not reality. And that's the risk. So it's very well intentioned, but when grandma or grandpa comes around and sort of asks that question, there's a sense that you really ought to know, and if you don't, gosh, what do you do with that? And so actually, one of the sort of sub-questions I did have in the mix here is, what messages do you give at your schools? Does it matter to you if a child, obviously a student has to have chosen a degree, and some degrees, I suppose, by definition, are leading to a very particular career. But broadly speaking, how do we as education, do we create messages where it doesn't actually matter if you hit 18 and you don't yet know? Question, does it matter if you get to the university and end of university and you don't yet know what you want to do? How do we help manage those conversations?
Well, I think the truth is that there are obviously a mix of pupils who have, from the age of about 3, a very good idea, for example, of what it was they wanted to do when they get to university. And then there are exactly those, Tim, who, at the point of applying are still not sure. I think I would count myself in that. And I think the important thing there is that they will need guidance, but they also have to have agency. If they feel like they're being shoehorned into something that isn't quite what they want to do, I have a feeling that it probably won't be that much fun for them. So it's difficult with some teenagers. Some of them are, despite the best efforts of their parents and teachers, still find it really hard to choose. And I think the best advice, and it's not revelatory at all, is to help them to see what it is they currently enjoy. There's a lot of traction in that. If they can take some of the things they're currently enjoying with them into tertiary education, that is exactly what I did as a biologist. I think that's certainly one route you can go down that I think will lead to a happy outcome.
I think we have to cater. In a school, either Eton or Charterhouse, we've got these huge year groups. You're going to have all kinds, right? You're going to have the kids who, from day one, they know they want to go off and read medicine, and that's their thing. And then our job then is just to make sure they're really well supported in that ambition, but also keep those lines of curiosity open in other areas that they might otherwise shut down. But my advice, and certainly the advice that's given at both of the schools that I'm involved with, you need to keep doors open. and keep them open for as long as possible. Don't close those doors, which is why the 4 A-level model is brilliant in some ways, because you can have your 3 specialist subjects, but use the 4th to do something else, something that might lead you down a path that you didn't know that you wanted to go down. That's why the IB is so fantastic as well. But certainly keeping all options open.
Tim, if I may, just one little element there, just thinking about university, are we sure? Really? I just wonder, and I speak to someone, I started A-levels, Latin, Greek, Ancient History, went to my tutor after 6 weeks and went, I think I'd like to change. He went, which one? I went, all 3. And so geography, chemistry, biology, and that took into a totally different path. But why I say that was, you talked about agency, being guided. Our children today, and I think we've got to be careful as parents as well, there are so many other options out there with children who are doing superbly well at whatever level that is. Yes, degree apprenticeships, they're incredible, but there are other bits too. The world is changed by entrepreneurs, watch the introverts, watch the ones who zig when everyone else is having a zag. Those elements there, give that creativity to them. They might well go into a space and then you can come back. There is time. Universities want great kids. If it's not their time immediately, they can just negotiate their way in beautifully after that, continuing with school supports and alumni networks to be there for them and help them. So it's many paths in this world.
And this speaks to a point which the famous educationalist Sir Ken Robinson exactly spoke to. He did a brief sort of rhetorical thought exercise in one of his famous talks on the TED platform online. He said, if aliens came down and worked out, how do humans define success? Well, every single child would be reaching Oxbridge. Every single child would be getting, we know, I think inherently, if we really scrutinise it, that is not a definition of success. It's a definition of success. It's a definition of success for some, but it cannot possibly be the definition of success collectively as a society or as a people. And, I happened to be talking to a very senior Oxbridge Don relatively recently. I was talking to him about my daughter. I said she's doing French, philosophy and English literature A-level, and she's doing Italian GCSE from scratch in a year. He went, why? I said, because she's a really good linguist, and we regretted giving up these things at GCSE, and I wanted her to do that. If she does a 4th, then how's she going to get the level of engagement and enrichment to really specialise on the 3 that will then get her the grades that will then get her into Oxbridge? And because I'd mentioned that she had ambitions. But that's the kind of world that our children are trying to negotiate, and there is a tension there, and how do we help them consider that as parents, I think, is a really important question. And if I may be so bold, if we rewind that umpteen years to prep school age range, what messages are we giving if we're over-tutoring them towards the point of nullifying their interest because you're so desperate for them to get through, not you personally, one is so desperate for them to get through the ICB pretest or whatever it is, but after that particular hurdle, what have they come out with as understanding the real joy of learning to be and things like that. These are messages that we sow for life, and we have to keep a balanced approach, I think, to what they think is success. Sorry, I'll get off my high horse now. Let's stick, shall we, just quickly with the sort of the school-parent-boy relationship, if we can do. We're talking here about trying to develop a shared understanding of success across the 3, really. That's the ideal, is that we triangulate with our children to help them to flourish. How do we think perhaps schools and parents can work to sort of reinforce balanced expectations?
I think it's really important that there's the same message or a similar message coming from both the school and the parents. I think kids flourish when they have that same message rather than competing things. So if we're talking about, character formation is really important. That feeds into academic results. But then another party is saying it's only academic results, that's all I care about. Then they're going to be torn. And this is why it's really important that you choose the right school that kind of fits with what the messages that you want to give. And so, and I think it's about praising those narratives. I know how difficult it is, my boys as well. Come back, what have you done today? Nothing, Dad. And you just think, nothing in a whole day? But actually, they're having that narrative, and when they're at home, my son, he's 7, and he really struggled with reading. And so he started telling himself this narrative of, I can't read, I'm not very good at it. He sits there with a book, loves the pictures, when he was 5 and 6, but couldn't read. And so the conversation that we start having about is, okay, here's a problem, how are we going to overcome it? Okay, let's sit down, let's do a little bit here. Oh, isn't that brilliant that you've made that progress? And if you start giving those narratives as parents, then that feeds into school and you join together to actually bring academic progress. I don't think it's competing, the formation and the academics. I think it's all one message, and therefore parents could be a complete part of that, and choose your school wisely to know that that is the message that they're also getting at school.
I think, talking from a personal point of view, one of the things we've talked about metrics of academic success and the more holistic character-based education and so on. I think what we have to acknowledge is, just as you, Rob, were describing how you can coach them through, from an academic sense, the learning process, the meta questions, how have you, reflecting on this, what have you done? I think if we're recognising that collaboration and emotional literacy and so forth are key skill sets which an employer will use to define, we have to recognise the approach and the training necessary to give the optimal pastoral care to help. This is about the emotional literacy and the understanding of managing oppositional views comes from how you manage those little playground conversations from the youngest age. And it may sound overly constructed, but if I walk past a dispute in the quad, heaven forbid, I don't just go, gents, come on, calm down and walk on. It's about just actually unpicking, okay, what's going on here, guys? Okay, so how could you perhaps have managed that bit differently, and why might they have reacted like that? What do you think that's saying? What's important to them about this? Just take the time to talk it through, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Hopefully, they'll be able to employ a little bit of that the next time round. But it's such a subjective area sometimes. I think, perhaps controversially for this sort of general topic, if we just look at pastoral care within our schools, how do we, James, I don't want to sort of land this in your, but you've been a very experienced housemaster. How does one try and gain a culture of that type of being bothered to have those conversations? And
well, I think going back to, I think we've mentioned words like agency and competence already. I think one of the fantastic things about the school environment is that it creates the opportunity for pupils to recognise each other's strengths, what they can all bring and contribute, etc. So, most schools will have a house system. I would say my 12 years in a housemaster show me that actually when they arrive, typically in years 9, 10, those skills that they need to resolve the various difficulties that are going to come up, to recognise the value of someone else being better at something than they are not yet fully formed. And it's amazing what happens actually in those first 2 years that I see that they suddenly get to a point where they're able to disagree about small things that usually would create tensions. And I think part of that is, and it's a natural sort of progression as you would expect, they suddenly have this autonomy and a kind of sense of self-responsibility, and schools suddenly start saying, well, I'm not going to fix this for you, but here are some guiding sort of principles as to how you can have done this slightly better, or what the sort of conversation you should have, etc., rather than having it for them. And for me, the biggest thing in terms of pastoral care, yes, sort of schools have a heavy influence on this, but it's the children's influence on each other. So creating that environment where they are not just doing it for show, but are genuinely happy to have someone who does something really different to what they do, but they see the value in that. The three big things that Winchester is working on is this sense of autonomy, this sense of competence, feeling that they are, it's not necessarily being good at something, but they can make progress at something, get some self-esteem. And then Rob mentioned it, this idea of relatedness, belonging. And it's that community aspect that is so important in creating that sense of belonging in pupils. And the house system, boarding or day, essentially I think that is what it is there to do.
And I think I was sort of sitting too, totally agree with that. Children, when they're young, they go around in clumps. I don't know if you've seen this, when they're sort of 13, 14, they're just clumps. I think we do it as grown-ups too sometimes when we go to places. And then in that first little bit of time, year 9, well, there's a few little brave ones who just go off on there and that, oh, I'm out of my clump, mine come back in. It's a bit like Nemo actually as well, I suppose, isn't it, with that side of things. But that piece there, the things that they're so worried about standing out for, those sense of self-doubt, and as they move through schools, when you get pastoral care right, as you do in our schools, by the time they get to the sixth form, those differences, those cracks in their, what they perceive in their characters and things, are actually the bits that they're celebrated more by their mates. It's so beautiful to see, well, actually, you love that, and you're a bit quirkier on that. That's the joy of, I think, what we get to do. We see these clumps evolve, and then it's sort of a slightly broader bit. And when they're in the sixth form, these clumps just happily move in and around apart, and then they have to reset all over again at university, which is super challenging, or in the world of work, which is even harder, because those clumps are pretty difficult to navigate. So I think that's something about the pastoral care, and if you nail that, when we try and nail that, the academics take care of themselves, frankly. Contented children, inspirational teachers in front of contented children in great spaces that have been intentionally thought about, and a culture of folk wanting to do some work. That's education. It's as simple as that, apparently.
Thank you so much. I'm very conscious that it would be great to take an opportunity to move on to Q&A if panelists are happy and got where they want to. It's always fantastic to just take 10 minutes, if we can do, to just see. We've obviously got in any sort of section of the parent body a huge range of experience, of professions, and so on. So good to have 5-10 minutes or so of Q&A if we can do. And forgive me if for technological reasons I repeat or paraphrase your question back so that the technology can pick that up. So has anybody got a question that they'd like to start with?
I did have one question. There's a constituency that was not really discussed here. You alluded to it, the feral influencer problem. What do the boys perceive as success, and has that changed, particularly since the advent of these external influencers?
So we're just coming back to that question of boys defining their own success through this possibly social media influences and so on. Who would like to take that?
One of the things I've noticed more and more is our year 9s coming in with a sense that money and muscles and the ability to use those to attract women are the most important things that define success. As they move through the school, and it's really interesting to me when adolescence came out and watching that, and it did not represent my experience whatsoever. And I spoke to the boys about it. So I tutor kind of more senior boys, and they said, the thing is, ma'am, that, you know, for the younger boys, they are finding these sort of Tate-type figures very, very impressive and interesting, but it doesn't take long for them to realise the kind of stupidity of it and the shallowness of it. And I've been so impressed by the range of masculinities celebrated at Eton. I know it's very similar at Charterhouse. This sense of, because we offer such a range of different things for them to show success in, actually the kind of kids who are focused on the money and the muscles are not going to, they're not the leaders of their year groups. And I think it doesn't take them long to realise that this is quite a childish impressionability, and that actually they can move away from that. They can choose to disregard that.
Yeah, I think it reflects an unhealthy need for dominance because of an insecurity that's underneath.
Yes.
And actually we need to address the insecurity that says actually you are worth something as you are, and actually as you develop to be the person that you were made to be, your talents, your purposes, your passions, that actually as you serve others, that's where you can find your worth. And as you can see yourself making progress, then actually those things will fade away because they're not scrapping in fear to make their mark in a way that isn't them. They actually start making their way in the way that they are, who they are.
It's worth saying that US universities absolutely love any kind of philanthropic endeavour, especially if you've set something up. If you've set up some kind of fundraising initiative, this brilliant kid I've got who hopefully will get into Princeton has set up a literacy and numeracy programme to bridge the gap between year 6 and 7 in the state sector. I mean, that sort of thing. And God, how brilliant for an employer to look at that. You did that when you were at school. That's incredible.
I do wonder with society driving us to fear a little bit that fear of the other and fear of the influencer. How much do we as parents actually sit down with our kids and say, well, just show me, who are these influencers? Just, you know, I watched one around sort of Cheeky Golf Club, if anyone's followed that. These 4 guys are complete nutters. But what was really funny, you actually, when you dug under it, and that wasn't sort of the money and muscle bit quite the same, they were trying to raise the profile, but as parents, I think it's really easy for us to just dismiss and say, oh gosh, I'm not sure about that. Get get your hands dirty. Just go and have a look, go and have a watch, go and have a listen to see what they're saying. Your children will pretty quickly, exactly as you say, Anna, say, well, that's absolute nonsense. They'll sometimes watch it for a bit of a laugh, actually, as well, because they think that's funny and that's that. Because teenagers, you know, their brain is not fully formed. 25, broadly, is when it gets there, just. So just have that courage just to sit down with them and just ask a little bit, you know, and then you can play the silly parent question. But yeah, I think to be brave on that, because it's really easy to just go, oh, just leave it out there. But we can't do that. We've got to know.
Yeah. Just go back to your question about how boys perceive success. I think going back to my point about the sort of, you know, the traits that you would associate with sort of immaturity of age. It's obviously very common for pupils at a younger age to look at themselves sort of in an isolated way and define success as me doing something or me achieving this. And obviously as schools, you know, what we're trying to engender in them, and I think what does change over the course of their time at school is this idea of collective success as well, and how happy it makes them. Sorry, happy. Yeah. When
not that much of an issue.
You know, they achieve something shoulder to shoulder, and you know, I think it's a function of maturity. But you know, schools are set up for this, and it's not just through the medium of sport. It's all sorts of things that you know, they recognise. Actually, you know, sharing in success is, you know, a hugely satisfying feeling for them.
Inter-house,
yes.
for example.
Yeah.
One of the best.
And I think Adam's point about, you know, when you're sat at a lunch table, having someone who, you know, is a fantastic musician, and someone who's a fantastic sportsman, and someone who is an entrepreneur, and these guys all sit together at a table, and you know, it's magic, as Adam says. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Chris.
Perhaps one observation and then one question for me. In terms of talking about the tension with getting into university with the grades, I think my experience of being in the workplace is exactly the same. Right? So I'm a partner in a law firm, and you won't get in that room unless you've got those grades. You just won't.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is once you're in the room, the grades have become completely irrelevant, and it's all of those other things that are important. Secondly, in terms of the question of kind of getting grades at the schools, then do you think there is this tension between the schools focusing on getting the grades, and then the other things that being sacrificed?
So do we think there's a tension between pursuing the grades and sacrificing that which we recognise as very important but not grade-based?
So I'd be really interested to hear your experiences, because my experiences at boarding schools has actually rather been the opposite, in that the emphasis, the time, the energy is so invested in the co-curricular, in the music, in the sport, in the drama, that actually the academic side, there's a kind of assumption that it takes care of itself. There are interventions where necessary. That hasn't been my experience at boarding schools, but I'd like to hear what others think.
I was thinking back to years, and you know, having seen several generations come through, I have seen year groups where a small culture can develop of thinking, actually, I'm going to not play cricket, I'm going to focus on revision, and other years where they've completely committed to the co-curricular. We had a fantastic example last year where the third 11 cricket was the kind of, you know, the talk of the king, exactly. You know, my own experience of this in rowing in particular was I think a good example, which is that conversely, you know, if you put aside more time for revision, etc. in the afternoon, it actually has a negative impact on your appetite to do it. I think they call it compartmentalization. You know, this idea that I've got a defined amount of time in which I've got to do this work and set about it with purpose, I think is, you know, it really works.
But do you think that the schools are encouraging, well, do you think the schools are taking away choices of kind of the art subjects because they're focusing on those subjects where they can get the best grades because the school's being judged by the grades that they're getting? Or if they're not taking away the subjects, are they really encouraging children to do the more traditional subjects rather than the arts because they think that their school will get better grades in this.
Yeah, well, if they are, they shouldn't be, because that's dreadful. It's about putting the child at the heart of every decision. Sorry to just...
For example, English literature or art or music, our children discouraged from doing those because the school is worried that it will pull the grade average down.
This is such an interesting question, and I think the thing I'd just like to emphasise is that if you look at the grades and you look particularly at the value added that arts subjects give students, it's way higher than in STEM subjects. So our difficulty in these schools isn't the fact that it's not coming from the school that they don't. We want them to do literature, we want them to take languages, we want them to take arts. They desperately want to do double maths, and you say to them, yeah, but you got a 7 in GCSE, I'm not sure double maths is for you, and say, oh well, my parents really want me to do double maths. You're saying, yeah, but your C in double maths isn't going to give you much, but your A star in German or art or design will. So let's have a look at where your skills are. And I don't think it's the schools that are taking away from those subjects. I think there's a cultural issue we have where we should be celebrating what this country is great at is creative content, creative people. And we have lost sight of that, I think. And I'd love to have a new emphasis on that.
And I think it's matched with passion, because you find that those that are doing art, you can't get them out of the art studio. They're putting the extra hours in, or theatre or whatever it is. That's wherever their passions are is where they're going to spend their time. And maybe it is maths. We run an electric car racing team, and so therefore they build it. And all of a sudden these students are now going and doing more physics to figure out the aerodynamics so that we can go faster. And so it's not just the arts, but it's about passion. It's about where are the passions, because what do you want to do in your free time? And if you do more of that in your free time, you're going to get a better grade. The more time you spend on it, the better you will do. And it's across the piece, but it is often in art subjects that they do that as well.
Some good guidance, I think, and empowering people to make good decisions with the child at the centre of that. I mean, just as an example, we've not focused on the outcome at our place for years now, and I don't believe in league tables. They're a complete measure of your admissions policy. And I worked in schools that were top in the country in Scotland around that. And who knew? You had a 130 IQ and 5 applicants in place. And don't slow the kids down. But actually we've moved from, if we were 320th to just outside the top 50 with the same intake of children over the last 10 years, in really mixing in a space over here. The children are loving what they're doing, they're making the right choices for them, they're all getting to where they want to get to for those next steps. It is very achievable, and I think all of us as schools do that. We're passionate about that, and none of us have got our heads sort of firmly buried in the league tables, because they're an absolute myth and rumour and all sorts of stuff. We love what we do for the children, and totally agree with you, Anna. Encourage that creative piece. That's the key stuff. And schools shouldn't do it. If they do, they shouldn't, because it's pretty naughty.
And
in my view.
Just as an advert for a later Parley further in the year, we've got to be open to the fact that AI plays a massive part in the landscape that we're going to be trying to work with this. The parts that AI cannot do, which is the managing the sticky human relational aspects and the tension when there isn't a right or wrong answer and all those sorts of things. And the use of it risks sort of atrophy in those muscles of collaboration and everything else, which we've just heard employers are fundamentally seeing as central. So do come back to that talk when we get to that later in the year. Maybe time for just one more question at all before we wrap up.
Could I pick up on that AI point?
Yes.
And I'm sure that all of us would like to say something about that. I think we got STEM a bit wrong. And I think one of the things we lost in how we thought about STEM was based on the principles of creativity and interdisciplinarity. And actually that's not quite how it's ended up being taught. And one of the concerns I have is we've spent a long time, decades, teaching pupils to be little computers. That's fine when there aren't great big computers. But we've got really, really powerful computers now who can do things in a better way than the human mind can, but not in certain areas, certainly not in imagination, not in creativity. I know that we talk about AI thinking, it doesn't think. That's what we have to say to enable people to understand what it's doing, what process it goes through. But I think we need to think, how do we get that creativity, that play, that imagination in every subject? not just the arts and humanities, but across STEM.
I was going to say that and it's been mentioned several times, but those qualities that allow you to pivot are going to be hugely important in a world of AI. I think I've yet to attend a talk that can adequately tell me what the impact of AI is going to be, because I think the truth is that we just don't know. And in that environment, that ability to change interdisciplinary things, those are going to be hugely important. So, in answer back to your question, anything that is reducing breadth, I think should be frowned upon. And within schools, we need to make sure we keep encouraging them, even once A-level subjects are chosen, to keep breadth.
Thank you. I was toying with the idea of putting each of you on the spot and just asking you for a single sentence on what defines success at the end of all of that discussion, but I don't know if anybody has an appetite for it, but if not... go on, Adam. You drew breath. Yeah.
No, I don't know. I mean, success, for all of us it'll be slightly different, but I think I'd have 4 bits. How, 4 questions really. How would I measure the success of my life is the title. Did I live a life less ordinary? Whatever that might be. Did I help others live a life less ordinary? Did I help others become fearless? And did I live in the light? Whatever that might mean for each person. Warmth and sun on your back. You make great decisions when you live in the light. I think that would be, everyone want to measure it differently, but for me those would be the 4 key questions that should sit at the heart of everything we do.
I don't think I'm going to define it, but I think it's important to recognise that your definition of success may have to change, that you're not going to share it necessarily with everyone else, and that we as parents and educators aren't the ones who necessarily decide. But if there's one thing I would pick up on, it is that sense of self-worth, self-esteem.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's your character, your purpose and your compassion, but more than that is saying, am I better than I was yesterday? Not comparing yourself with anyone else, but looking at yourself and saying, how can I step forward? And as you do that, you feel successful every single day because you are making a difference to both yourself and the people around you. So I think it's that constant belief in yourself that you can make a difference in one way or another.
I'm going to try and narrow it down to 3 words instead of a sentence. So I think courage, which has come out a lot today, and I think that courage, I know that I work on heroism, so maybe that's why I place such a premium on it, but courage, the small acts of heroism that we can do for one another each day, that is part of it. Kindness is so important for the obviously benefit of others, but also a sense of self-worth and your own integrity, and imagination. I think imagination has to be at the heart of success.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you to you for giving up a little portion of your Saturday morning. I would like to thank Adam, James, Rob and Anna for all of your insights and wisdom and heroic attempts to answer some very big questions before lunch on a Saturday. Thank you. Please continue to spread the word about the Parleys. We'd love to have more and more people coming to enjoy these, I think, genuinely beneficial conversations. But if you could please finish by warmly applauding our panellists. Thank you.